Good morning, everybody. So we are back here at the Exploration Place, and today we thought we'd try a new spot since we have a new animal ambassador. We are going to get going here with headkeeper Sabrina, and, well, why don't we jump right in? Who have you got there?
Hey guys! So, this is our newest friend here at the Exploration Place. And his name is Zoe, but I think we'll probably be changing that.
Now, why?
He was purchased as a female, but the previous owners had some suspicions that that might not be true. And looking at him now, I can tell. This is the first time I've actually checked because I was trying to just give him some time to settle in since we've got him. But I definitely do not think that this is a female. Initially, when I saw him, I guess, I questioned it as well, just due to the size. We've mentioned in our videos before that female snakes are much larger than the males, and for his age, this snake would be quite a bit bigger if it was a female, about 5 or 6 years old. So corn snakes tend to reach anywhere between 2 to 5.5 feet around there, but again, the females are much larger and they reach that size in a pretty short time. They get to about 3 or 4 feet. This one's about 3.5 feet and is 6 years old, so I'm assuming it's a male based on that. And after checking, I think I've confirmed that.
Okay, well, how do you check to see what sex a snake is?
That's a good question. So you can take them to the vet and have them probed. That's the most accurate way to be able to tell for sure what they are. But especially with these snakes that are very common in the pet trade, there's a couple of different other ways to tell. So one way you can tell is by looking here at the ventral scale, which is right near the base of my thumb there. I don't know if you can see it that well.
I think so, yep.
It's just one, it's one scale that kind of sticks out and looks different, and that is basically where their butt is, the cloaca, which I have showed you guys and talked about before on different animals.
The cloaca is where their poop and their pee and everything.
That's where everything that comes out of their body comes from. Yeah, eggs, live babies with garter snakes, poop, pee, all that comes out of here. And so the distance between this scale and the end of their tail, as well as the width as it tapers down, will tell you if it's a male or a female. The females have a shorter distance between the end of their tail and the vent scale, and they have almost what looks like hips. They have sort of a wider area at the vent scale, and that's for the production of babies. Whereas the males tend to have more of a long, thin tail that tapers down from the vent, so that's a good way to tell. Whoop.
So, started off as Zoe. I guess we're calling him...
I think maybe Joey.
Joey? Joey's a good name. Yeah, what the heck?
Either way, the snake can't hear us, so I don't think the snake cares too much.
What do you mean it can't hear us?
Well, they don't hear the way that we do, so I'm assuming that names and things like that aren't going to matter too much. They don't have the same type of ear structure as we do. If you look, you'll notice there are no holes. So it's not like a lizard where it has an external hole and an inner eardrum. Their eardrum is actually the bone that supports that is fused into their jaw. So they do use that to feel vibrations and they can hear certain tones, but they don't hear it all the way that we do. So their auditory capacity is much different than that of lizards and other reptiles, and much different than mammals.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Now he looks a lot like Cream. You brought a picture of Cream here.
Yeah, most of our guests will recognize Cream, who was our infamous corn snake. He lived to be ancient. He was 25 when he passed away, which is fairly old for a corn snake. The oldest one on record, I recently found that the newest world record was 32 years old. Cream was 25 years old when he passed away. So he definitely had a very long life for a corn snake. They generally tend to live about 15 years in captivity. But he was definitely a very healthy and long-lived snake. Eventually, he developed what I believe to be mast cell cancer. He had tumors on the outside of his skin. It didn't bother him too much until he started to kind of get even older and slow down, and the one outside one was kind of looking a little bit, a lot of our guests will remember, he had a bit of an ulceration on one of his scales there. So he had a bit of a sore there. It still, at that time, didn't seem to bother him too much. I would put ointment on it to prevent it from being infected. But eventually he just slowed down to the point where we decided, it was time to call it quits, and he wasn't kicking the bucket on his own. So we did take him to Ospika Animal Hospital, and we had their staff help him pass over. So he went peacefully. He had a really long life, and he didn't have any kind of problems.
Well, I know Cream was often the very first snake that anyone ever touched or handled in this community.
Cream was the very first snake that, whoop, what are you doing? She went to smell my nose and I booped her.
Oh.
Cream was the very first snake that I ever held. Actually.
Really?
Yeah, when I was about 5 years old, I got to hold Cream. And this is very reminiscent of that. So it was really cool to be able to work with him as an adult when he was the first snake I held as a kid and helped inspire the love that I have now for these animals. So.
Well, that's the whole reason to have these animal ambassadors.
Exactly. A lot of people have come in here and had their minds changed about certain animals, specifically snakes. We had Cream, we've got Rio, Hugo, and Bubba. All of these guys are wonderful animal ambassadors that will help change people's minds about animals that they might think are scary or gross or slimy. So that's definitely the main reason that we have these animals here, is to be able to create a better understanding and appreciation for them, both in captivity and in the wild, because a lot of people they don't understand them. They've never spent any time with them, and most of the time when somebody is afraid of or just uneasy or grossed out by snakes, and they come here and they spend some time with them, they come around and they learn that they're not as bad as they thought.
They're really interesting animals.
Yeah.
So now that I'm looking a little more closely at him, his color looks different than Cream did. Cream was a snowcorn or an albino.
Yeah, so Cream was completely, his color was completely washed out. You could see a little bit of pink on him and a slight banding, but he was almost entirely white, which is nowadays you would call a snow or a blizzard corn snake. This one here, so I'm not super good with morphology, the different kinds of color patterns and morphs that exist in captive bred animals. The only ones that I really have researched in depth are basically genetic markers that would have some kind of effect on the animal's health. For example, high white is a gene that exists in domestic rats, and it is associated with a lot of different health risks, conditions like megacolon and things like that. But it is used widely by breeders to produce specific color markings. So it's definitely one of those things that you need to look out for if you're dealing with rats. And I've always found those kinds of genes very interesting, where it actually has an impact on the animal's health or the animal's function, whereas most markings are simply just that. It's just an appearance related thing.
You mentioned before we went live that the albinism, the albino snakes, tend to be prone to those cancers.
Yeah, and a lot of that is just the fact that people have focused so much in the pet trade on producing specific colors that they focus less on what those animals' other genetic conditions may be. So, for example, somebody who had 2 albino corn snakes wanted to produce more albino corn snakes. They often would not consider as much the health or the genetic quality of that animal more so than they would the color of that animal, because that's what they're after.
You brought a picture here, I think, of the different colors. I'll see if I can get in close enough for people to see.
Yeah, so there are quite a few different variations among corn snakes in captivity. Even in the wild, you will see albino corn snakes and things like that. It's just not as common, obviously. I believe that this corn snake that we have here now, Zoe or Joey, we'll have to decide, is a butter corn snake, which is just a type of albino corn snake, basically, that still has a little bit of coloration to them, but doesn't have that wild pattern.
This one's neat, too.
Yeah, there are lots of different variations.
This one looks purple.
Yeah, I think that is a lilac. It's either a lilac or a lavender morph, and the really cool thing about those ones is they have the washed out light color, but they still have the black eyes, so there are so many different combinations of genes that you can get breeding certain types of animals, and corn snakes are one of those. So that's probably part of the reason that they have become so popular in the pet trade.
So Joey has fairly dark eyes, but they do have red in them.
Yeah, they have red, and they have sort of a bluish ring on the outside.
Yeah, and he's definitely got the yellow in him too, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So basically, there are different types of pigments that exist in these snakes, and they're marked on a series of genetic markers. So when you're breeding 2 different snakes, one parent can produce multiple different kinds of babies. For example, a parent could be albino but still carry the genes to produce non-albino babies, or vice versa. So it's definitely one of those things that, unless you know the snake's parents, you would have to breed the snake to find out exactly what genes that snake carried.
Whether they're dominant or recessive.
Yeah, unless you had a documented history of the snake. So that's why I say with this one here. I think it's a buttered corn snake, but it's hard to be able to say exactly what morph it is or, you know, what genes it carries without breeding it or knowing exactly where it came from.
Fair enough. So I've got a question here from Frank. I'm impressed. Frank's watching a snake video.
Hi, Frank.
He would like to know, how did we get this guy at Exploration Place?
That's a great question. So this little guy was purchased as a pet, actually probably inspired by Kareem, because the family that donated him to us was a family that came here quite frequently throughout their childhoods. The kids are grown up a bit now; they're teenagers, and they are moving. They're moving to a new city, and their house is going to be constructed in the meantime. So they'll be there, and they're going to be living in sort of cramped quarters while they're waiting for their house to be constructed. And they've also got other pets, and they were kind of concerned about having the snake in a cramped setup with their other animals and kids and everything like that. So they didn't want to just give her to anybody, but they thought they would reach out to us because they knew that Kareem had passed away. And they thought that maybe we would enjoy another corn snake as an animal ambassador. And this snake has a lovely personality so far. He's settled in pretty well. He's been a little bit timid when we first brought him in, but he's not showing any signs of being stressed out or anything like that. Seems to be doing really well. He's drinking water, moving around the enclosure, all that kind of stuff. They're primarily nocturnal, so you'll see them usually moving around closer to the beginning or the end of the day. But he seems to be doing very well. So the reason that we took it in was just basically that he wasn't fitting into their lifestyle as much as he was when they purchased him 6 years ago or 5.5 years ago. But they didn't want to just give him to anybody, and they knew that he would do well here and would be taken care of. So we decided it was a good fit.
We get offered a lot of animals, don't we?
We definitely do. Everything from wild animals like bats and ermines, or, you know, small weasels, crows, things like that, obviously. Any kind of exotic pet like this, we get offered. Turtles constantly, bearded dragons, all that kind of stuff.
Iguanas.
Yeah, so the list definitely goes on, and is probably longer than I could ramble on for a very long time of the different types of animals that people have offered us. If we can, obviously, like the tree frog, we took that one in. That one didn't really have anywhere else to go. And there's certain times when I will personally take animals from people. I used to, as a lot of people know, I used to do rescue. So in many cases, I will just try and refer people to other rescue societies or local shelters, things like that, or local individuals I know who can care for these animals. But the main thing that people don't realize is that when you buy one of these animals, it's a huge commitment, and a lot of the time people think that it's sort of a simple thing, like, you know, like having a goldfish or something like that, and it's not. So very, very often people will purchase these animals without doing too much research or, you know, thinking too far ahead in the future. And a lot of our animals, Sandy, Rio,
Sally the turtle that we used to have.
Sally the turtle, a lot of them come from people who either purchased them and didn't realize or didn't think about the long-term commitment, or they come from people who just think that they would be, you know, a good animal ambassador here, which is the case with this one. So it definitely depends, but it's astounding the number of animals that end up in rescues and shelters and through individual, you know, private collectors who rescue animals, just because of the fact that the people who purchased the animal didn't do as much research or as much sort of planning as they may have been required to, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. These are, you know, 15, 20, 25-year commitments.
Well, exactly. And like Rio, our ball python, for example, those guys live at least 20 years, sometimes much, much longer. They can live up to 40 years. So it's definitely one of those things where, or our tortoise Tom, we purchased him ourselves, but a lot of people do buy them as pets, not realizing that they're going to get bigger or that they're going to live for 50 years. So it's definitely something that you want to do a lot of planning and a lot of research and a lot of sort of gauging realistically what that's going to look like for you in your future, and if that's going to fit into your lifestyle for 20 years or not.
Yeah, I know the family that brought us Joey here would have kept him if we didn't take him, but this seemed like a better option for the snake.
The moving around, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not the best for an animal like this to be moved super frequently, and especially if they're living in a high traffic small area with a lot of people and a lot of other animals, then that would definitely be something that could stress them out. And this is a good place for a snake to be anyway, so I think that worked out in the end. But
Now, that's not to say we want people to start bringing us their snakes.
There's many, many times when I've been given animals that I had no choice but to take just because of the circumstance. And it's really sad that animals end up in those situations where it's almost like a hostage situation. And there are some times where people will bring you an animal and they are asking you to take it. And whether or not you really have the means to take it realistically in a way that is not going to be majorly inconvenient to you, people will often kind of make you that last resort and you have no choice. So that's part of the reason I used to do rescue, was that there were so many animals that people were either dropping off at pet stores or calling the museum to try and donate, things like that. So it's definitely something that if you are at all interested in keeping an exotic animal, you need to do a lot of research to make sure that you're 100% sure that you want to keep that animal for its entire lifespan. If you don't, if you are looking to maybe try out something like that, you can come here and check out the animals here, or you can contact shelters. Like, I know the Humane Society now takes reptiles, and you could apply to be a foster home for an animal like that. And that way, if you decide that it isn't the best fit for your life in that time, then you can sort of learn from that and not just jump headfirst into owning an animal that you may not necessarily be able to or want to take care of.
Yeah, I've told people for years, just come and get to know ours, because our animal ambassadors are great, and you always get the opportunity to have that experience with them and talk to people like you.
And another great way to enjoy animals is to just go out in the wilderness and see them, and obviously, be respectful, keep your distance. But there's lots of cool animals around here that you can enjoy firsthand without having to take home. So that's definitely a really cool thing to be able to do. We have a lot of wildlife here in Prince George.
Do we have corn snakes here that are wild?
We don't. So I was actually going to talk a little bit about that. Corn snakes are in the same family as garter snakes. They are culibrids, meaning that the culibrid family was sort of like the misfit family for snakes for a long time. There are different genetic markers now that they kind of classify them by, and there are different subspecies of culibrid, obviously. But for a long time, it was the snakes that didn't fit into the other categories of snakes. So they didn't fit in with the vipers, they didn't fit in with the constrictors, they didn't fit in with any sort of group of snakes that already existed and well studied. So when they were classifying different types of snakes, culibrids often would get kind of just lumped together in this like mismatched sort of family. These guys are similar to garter snakes in some ways. They are a type of rat snake. There are quite a few different species of rat snake, and the corn snake is one of them. They are native to the United States. You can find them in the southeastern states, Florida, Virginia, Tennessee, those areas. And so there's two different explanations, but neither is known of where the corn snake's name comes from. So some people say that they were named for their color, especially the wild, natural sort of morph color pattern that exists in corn snakes. They will have a checkered pattern on their belly that's usually yellow and orange. So part of the reason for their name might be that pattern resembles sort of an ear of variegated corn. So it's got the speckly sort of orange and yellow colors that you would see. But I think a more realistic reason that they're called corn snakes, and what a lot of people argue is the real reason that they're called corn snakes, is because of the fact that they are often found in grain silos and corn fields and things like that, because their favorite prey is rodents like mice, rats, things like that. So they definitely hang out where those prey would hang out. So if you have a farm with lots of corn or grain or anything like that in the States, you're very likely to find corn snakes, whereas here you would find garter snakes.
So you said they're related to garters, but I know garters have live birth, and these guys lay eggs.
Yeah, so they are in different subfamilies of the culibrid group of snakes. But so rat snakes like these guys, or the black rat snake. There's a couple of different rat snake species throughout the States. The milk snake. Those guys all lay eggs, and they don't have as many babies either. So garter snakes give birth to live young, as we've discussed in our other videos, which is not very common for snakes. Most snakes, about 70 to 80% of snakes, lay eggs, like this snake here would. Well, I mean, not this one because it's a male, but this species would. And they lay about up to 24, I think, is a large number of eggs. That's a large clutch. And then the eggs incubate and they hatch, and the babies are, again, self-sufficient, just like other snakes, so they go off on their own. Whereas with garter snakes, the babies are born live.
I know with Peaches, who was our other corn snake that we used to have, I've got a picture of her here. This is a staff member, some of you might remember, Erin, and Peaches, who was Cream's mate for a long time. She had to have cesarean sections because her uterus was twisted and she would pass 17 eggs and the 18th was always stuck.
That's so strange. There are a lot of reproductive anomalies with snakes, which is, again, another reason why, if you haven't done a ton of research, it's not a good idea to bring them home. But definitely egg-bearing snakes are more prone to having issues like prolapse or like issues with becoming egg-bound, which is where the eggs will basically be stuck inside the female. Sometimes the eggs will even get stuck together in a cluster. They're more prone to those things, not just because of captive overbreeding, but also because of the fact that they produce eggs. Whereas garter snakes have the live birth, so that's a little bit more advantageous.
We tried to hatch the eggs too, a couple of times, and never had any luck.
They're tricky. They're definitely tricky to hatch if you don't have the exact proper parameters in terms of heat and humidity in the proper sort of incubation setup. Then the eggs often won't hatch. But there's also a chance that maybe she was infertile if she did have reproductive problems in the first place.
That's possible too.
So the eggs could have just been what you would call a dud or a slug, which is just basically an empty egg. We've shown before our crested geckos quite frequently lay eggs, and the eggs are empty. Our crested geckos are both females, and they both just continue to lay eggs throughout their entire life, which a lot of animals do. I mean, if you think of chickens and things like that, they sometimes will just continually produce eggs, even if it has not had any viable breeding.
The babies are sure cute though.
Oh yeah, baby corn snakes are adorable. Look at that gigantic eyeball on
I know,
them.
the eyes are so big.
Yeah, they're so cute. Baby snakes are adorable. When Hugo had her babies a few summers ago, I couldn't believe how tiny they were, especially because garter snakes are born live. Just being able to see them, and they don't develop and break out of an egg. It's a lot like a mammal's birth, so that's a really interesting thing to see. Not as to say that seeing a corn snake hatch wouldn't be cool. They actually have what is called an egg tooth, which is sort of like a little hook on the end of their mouth. So most snakes that come from eggs have that, and that's how they get out. It's almost like a little beak that develops while they're in the egg and then goes away after they have hatched. So that's a really strange
Like
and
chicks.
cool. Yeah, it's a really strange, cool evolutionary mechanism. Again, like how the garter snakes give live birth. That's another thing that allows them to be able to survive in their environment. So it's crazy the amount of variation that exists even among very similar species.
I've got a question here for you from Katie. She would like to know what you feed them.
Hi, Katie. Miss you guys. So we feed these guys. This one eats small rats. You can feed them other things too. We've mentioned before with our garter snakes, we feed them fish. Corn snakes, you can feed fish, but they're more likely to feast on rodents just because that's what they would eat where they're from. They'll also eat small lizards, small lizards and birds and stuff like that in the wild. She's moving around a lot.
She is. We don't feed live though. We always feed frozen.
We never ever feed live. Outside of things like insects and small fish, we always feed frozen and thawed. With rodents especially, it can be dangerous both to the snake, and sort of inhumane, I would say, to the prey item if you're feeding live rodents, because rodents are a very intelligent species and they're going to know what's coming long before it happens. So that's not really ethical, in my opinion, to put them through that undue stress when it isn't necessary. Most snakes, with a little bit of trial and error, will eat frozen and thawed food, even if they were fed live from a young age. So for me, it's not worth the risk or the ethical concern to feed live animals, especially rodents, to other animals. So that's definitely something that I would recommend if you do have a snake that eats live. It's not that hard to switch them to frozen and thawed, and it's less risky for your snake. I've seen snakes that have developed some very gnarly injuries and infections from being fed live rodents, so that's definitely something I wouldn't recommend.
Fair enough, the rodent's going to fight back.
Yeah, it's not like in the wild where they are ambushing a prey item in a huge open space, or where it's, a natural setting. So it's definitely something that I think is not the most responsible thing to do.
So I think Chad here is just trying to test me. He's out a question, and there's a word in it, I don't know what it is. Here we go. Do corn snakes have hibernacula like garters?
They do, but it depends on the region in which they are found. So corn snakes, whoops.
What is hibernacula?
Hibernacula is the ability to go into a ruminative state.
Oh, so it's hibernation.
Yes.
Right.
So these guys will winter in dens. They're very similar behavior to garter snakes, where garter snakes don't always go into brumation, depending on the region that they're found in. For example, in Mexico, they don't. So if these guys are in a warmer area in the southern states, they will not go into hibernation or brumation. Oh, you just went in my mouth. But if they live in colder regions, they will. And these guys definitely have like a very wide geographic range, and they exist in a lot of different environments. So they can be found as high as 6,000, I think 6,000 miles above sea level. So they'll go up mountains and things like that, where you'll find them living up high on hillsides, but you'll also find them down in valleys. So it definitely depends on the variation.
Probably 6,000 feet.
On the
Not miles.
That's what I meant to say.
Otherwise, we're into outer space.
So it definitely depends on the location
Yeah.
and the specific environment that they live in. But they can go into brumation, and they don't they don't den in huge groups the way that garter snakes do, though. They're not as communal as garter snakes, which live in huge social groups. These guys tend to be a solitary species, so in the springtime they do kind of cluster a little bit more, especially because that's their breeding season. But they're not typically found denning in pits of 1,000.
That's really neat. Well, boy, he has sure been patient with us today.
Yes, I think I'm going to take him back right away, because this is the first time I've really handled him, and he's done really well, and I don't want to push it too far.
Not bad for doing it live on Facebook.
Yeah, don't go in my mouth. That's not what I want. I like you. But
Awesome. Well, you will be back on Friday, and on Friday at 10 o'clock, we're going to be looking at a bunch of our insects and carnivorous plants, I understand.
Yeah, I think me and Chad he's going to do the plants, because I'm bad at that. So we're going to tell you guys a lot about the carnivorous plants that we have a carnivorous plant here, so we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to relate that to carnivorous plants that you can find here around BC, which a lot of people don't even know that we have. So
it sounds like I'm going to be learning lots again on Friday, and tomorrow it'll be another edition of What Does Chad Have, and he's joining us to talk specifically about a local personality, Yukon Joe. So tune in again tomorrow at 10, and we will see you again on Friday. Thanks so much, Sabrina. If anyone's got any questions,
go ahead and leave them in the comments, and we will try and answer them as soon as we can.
and I was supposed to say this at the outset, but please share our videos, tell your friends about them, tag people in the comments. The more people that see these, the wider we'll be able to get our message out there. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow at 10. See you later, Joey.